Hey folks. Well, as some of you know, I really like to put pilot figures in my scale models, especially the larger scale ones like 1/32. Now, I see a lot of comments from other builders who probably are in the majority in terms of how they handle cockpit adornment and basically don't put in the figures even if they're included. Uh, the reasons for that might be folks saying, I really don't paint figures that well. Okay, well, I guess that's their self-assessment, so be it. Uh, One of the common ones I hear is, hey, if you put a pilot figure in the cockpit, you're going to cover up a lot of that lovely detail. And that, of course, happens to be, in most cases, very true. But I think there's another issue that uh, dissuades people from trying to put in pilot figures, especially aftermarket pilot figures, as opposed to whatever may have come with the kit, inside a cockpit, regardless of the make. And I want to do a little trial here of mostly, yes, with one exception, aftermarket pilot figures that I've acquired over the past year or so, some painted, some not, and see just how indeed whether or not they'll fit inside my test mule for these purposes, a partially built Hasegawa Bf-109F, which I have never finished. And I think it probably, just to jump ahead, when we get to this big guy here, I think you can probably guess that Andre the Giant isn't going to fit in a Bf-109 cockpit, or probably any other cockpit for that matter. How it got printed up that large by the person who sold it to me, I don't know, but that's another story. So let's take a look and test these figures one by one. Now, the disclaimer, of course, is many times, almost always, the best way to insert or fit a pilot figure is before you close up the fuselage and, in fact, even complete the cockpit detailing. These figures don't bend, so it's often very much easier to fit non-bending surfaces, limbs, before you close up the cockpit or the fuselage than after the fact. Okay, one by one now. We'll start with Eric Hartman over here on the left. Hartman is a 1/32 scale resin figure, aftermarket figure from Doug's Originals out of Korea. And he almost fits. He almost drops down. The edges of his breeches are catching along that narrow cockpit along the side. And I think he would actually go in this way if I trimmed those off, or definitely go in had I fitted him before I closed this all up. Well, here's Adolf Galland, another Luftwaffe ace of some note, and he's not getting anywhere close to getting into the cockpit, either before or after closing up the fuselage. But in fairness, he wasn't molded to fit inside a cockpit. Indeed, this mold was based off of a picture of him jumping out of, or poised on the ledge of his cockpit, the edge of his cockpit frame, about to jump out onto the wing. Like that. So it's a nice fit for what it was intended to be, but he wouldn't go inside the cockpit without major surgery. Having to bring those legs together, shave off the sides, straighten out the back, probably. This is the way he's meant to be posed. Another figure from Doug's Original, as was Adolf Galland, by the way, so this is the third one in a row. A resin figure, Hans Joachim Marseille, and looking very casual and relaxed. He won't fit inside the cockpit this way. It would take major surgery, and I hate to ruin that figure. But again, he wasn't meant to be inside the cockpit. I'll pose him in the way it was intended. There we go. Yeah, if I ever finish this Bf-109 G, no, this is an F. This is actually Marseille's plane, or from the Hasegawa kit. I will certainly pose him this way rather than destroying this lovely resin figure. Yet another resin figure from Doug's original, and this is Josef Preller. Now, from what I can see of the box art or photography, he's actually posed inside an FW-190, Focke-Wulf 190, which has a wider cockpit. So I'm not surprised he doesn't fit inside the Bf-109, which is much narrower. Dropping him down there, he would only go in by basically shaving off a good portion of everything from the waist down, and then he would probably fit. This is a Zukai Mora resin aftermarket generic Luftwaffe pilot. The shins and feet are catching underneath the control panel there, and the elbows are catching. A little bit of trimming, he would probably go in. If I'd put him in before I had closed up the canopy or the cockpit details, he might have fit as is. This aftermarket RAF resin pilot almost slipped in. I didn't think he would, but I think I could get him in with just a little bit of trimming around the boots, and he might have fit without any trimming at all had I put him in first. Of course, the left arm would have to dangle outside of the cockpit there. Here's another RAF pilot from the same company that made the previous one. I forget who it is at the moment. He's got his knees tucked up there, but not a stance that works well at all with this very narrow Bf-109 cockpit. Probably a substantial amount of surgery to get him in, even if I had done him before, added him before closing up the fuselage. Of course, it would be a captured Bf-109 in that case, right? Okay, here's Andre the Giant, otherwise known as a U.S. Navy pilot. I'm not going to mention the name of the manufacturer. 3D resin printed, and I can only assume that the settings on the dial or the computer code weren't quite right when this guy was produced. He'll paint up nice, but I don't have a, maybe a 1/24 scale airplane? Yeah, he might fit in that. Well, somebody had to fit, right? The final one, this is a stablemate of Andre the Giant, supposedly printed in the same scale. He's about the size of a 10-year-old boy in 1/32nd scale, or maybe a young teenager in 1/35th, sitting a bit low, but of course, he dropped right in. I will refrain from making any caustic comments or snide comments about the lack of scale integrity for miniature figures in the aftermarket world. It's just something you got to live with. I am sure I will keep buying aftermarket resin and plastic pilot figures, especially for those big kits that don't come with figures, and I'll be trying in one way or the other to squeeze them inside cockpits. But I can see a lot of good arguments for getting standing figures and just posing them next to the airplane. But I've got my quirks, so I've got to live with the other side of the issue, which is a fair amount of figure bashing to make them work. But that's okay. Thanks for watching.